moving on in our series on James, nearing the end, I might add, where James talks about the brevity of life. And what we're going to be looking at is James 4, verses 11 through 17 this morning. And I'll read that text. So James 4, verses 11 through 17. It says, "Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another? Come now, you who say, tomorrow or today or tomorrow we will go to such and such city, we'll spend a year there, we'll buy and sell, we'll make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him that knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." So James in his letters addresses, as we've seen over the course of several weeks, addresses a lot of very dire things that were going on in the early church and in this sphere of life. And this is no exception. So basically, he's going to talk about a couple things here. He's going to talk about reliance on God, to always seek out to do God's will. But he also approaches it from an aspect of dealing with money and not letting money corrupt you and things like that. So think about this. In both the New Testament world and certainly in our time, people become wealthy a number of ways. But primarily, in those times, and I would say even primarily today, A, you're either controlling some kind of business enterprise, or B, you're owning property, some kind of productive property that you're doing something with. Land and money allow the owners essentially to control others. Okay? In the Greco-Roman times, it was often the same individuals who controlled governments, who commanded armies, who owned large swaths of land. They ran business enterprise. These were all kind of inclusive to what they did. In other words, there's a lot of people that had a lot of great power and influence. And I would say that probably hasn't changed all that much today. Kind of a side note as I was reading and looking at some stuff of this, one thing that has changed a little bit is I said the world had changed in that regard. One thing that kind of has changed that we may be accustomed to that back then wasn't so much the case is nowadays we can have a skill or profession that will allow the individual to be fairly well off. We have people in their trades. You may be in welding or an engineer or a physician or something that allows you to kind of grow your own economic prosperity. That's not so much in James and Paul's day, that wasn't so much the case. It was primarily people who owned business enterprise or owned a lot of land. Back then, your personal skill really offered not a whole lot in the way of economic reward. But I'll say this, when you look at their time and you look at even today, whether we're talking about Rome, we're talking about the U.S., these strong, stable, and I'd say Rome was stable at the time, their governments do allow a system in which people can accumulate wealth. And in some cases, it accumulates in the hands of a few that do expand their power and their ability to have a lot of influence. Wealth, in turn, gives birth to powerful people who can have their wishes become law. Right? It still happens today, right? You got enough money, you can buy. We got the best government money you can buy. You don't think so? That we got 25,000 plus lobbyists in D.C. You got money, you can buy influence. Not surprisingly, though, and you're probably thinking, where are you going with this? Jesus had a lot to say about wealth. Okay? And what it controlled, what it could do, the ways in which people handle it and use it. So we see in the Bible a lot of important moral issues arise out of the accumulation and use of possessions. Okay, we've read a lot in the New Testament. In one parable, we read where a rich man entrusted the money to the care of his servants, and in time came back to ask and find out how it had been used. You know, we talk about the talents, right? We read about that over in Matthew 25. But what did Jesus challenge the disciples? He challenged them to consider God's care for the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, inasmuch as he's saying what? If God's in charge, God's going to take care of you. Jesus said that covetousness is like a disease. In Luke, he talked about how it's like a consuming disease that can overtake it. Now, like his brother Jesus, James also devoted a considerable portion of his teachings to talking about wealth and possession. In fact, if you really break it down, probably no other subject occupies a greater portion of his short letters. We read about it in chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. He touches on it in chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, chapter 4, verses 13 through 17, where we're today. And he talks about it in chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. So what James is trying to get at here is he's saying that possession, arrogance, and pride, they're kind of bedfellows. To own, to have wealth and to land. For some people, now let me preface that by saying some people, because we all know that we're not talking an indictment on accumulation of wealth. There's nothing inherently wrong with that at all. But what we're talking about, what Jesus was talking about, what James was talking about, was what do we do with it? How do we use it? In this context, we're talking about how wealth and land and resources are being used to sort of control people. Okay? And what happens is, it's sort of our own pride, is what James is driving at. Having wealth and having riches often tend to breed self-reliance. Right? I mean, that's the reason we want to accumulate wealth, right? So we can be independent, so we can have our needs met, so that we don't have the worries of day-to-day living. Okay? In a lot of regards, humility in this early context was kind of the domain of the poor. You know, we see a lot of examples where the wealthy were very prideful. They were very full of themselves. Jesus talked about a man who had wealth stored up for many years, but he wouldn't even have the breath to last through the night. But what was this guy going to do? We read about that in Luke 12. Actually, let's turn there real quick. Luke 12, verses 16 through 21. Just to kind of spotlight that verse. Somebody turn there. Read that for me.
Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentiful. And he thought in himself and said, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? He said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater ones, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for you many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night thy soul required of you. Then will these things be dignified. So is he who lays up no treasure for himself, and not returning to God.
Thank you. So what we're driving at here in Luke is, in the end, this accumulation of wealth isn't going to do a whole lot for you. And James is trying to give people sort of the same reminder The lives of the rich and poor alike, James said, are vapors that appear briefly. So regardless of how wealthy one might come to be, when they mistreat others, as James would later say in James 5, verse 5, he basically says when you mistreat others, and he's talking about it in the context of this wealth and pride allowing you to do that, that you're basically storing up wrath for the age to come. So you got bad things coming to you. Okay? So that's kind of where James sets the stage here, is saying, hey, you know what? None of us are getting out of this thing alive. So you better have some reliance on God. Tell you a little, just something that made me think of. We were camping recently in North Carolina. We went to the Biltmore. Anybody been to the Biltmore? It's amazing. If you've ever been there, you need to go there. You know, George, sir? It needs some siding. But you know, this is something I hadn't thought of. You know, George Vanderbilt built this huge mansion, right? And he really didn't live that long to enjoy it. Guy died at 51. So the thought I had was, whether you're a servant there, or you're George Vanderbilt, or you're the farmer working that property, what do we all have in common? Life is short. And that's kind of the angle that James is coming at here. So let's look at why we need to think about this. First off, life is too brief to speak evil. And hone in on James 4:11 and 12. Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another? So scholars and students of James sometimes have difficulty in deciding how this piece of scripture fits into the totality of his letter. Some folks feel that this kind of stands alone and it's its own thing and it has little to do with what precedes or follows them. Others say that these are well constructed and they're a great transition from James's earlier rebuke of his readers for sort of internal dissension and his indictment of those folks who were in love with earthly riches. But on the whole, I think when we look at it, the latter probably makes a stronger case. It was a good transition for James. It makes sense that from what he was talking about to how he's moving into this, talking about life and how it's short and how we need to trust God. As people interact and as people choose their different priorities, how they spend their time, the clothing you wear, the way that you talk, it's not always going to be the same. James urged his readers to respect the decision of those who take God's law as the beginning for their upright living. So we're not always going to be 100% the same. We do different things with different perspectives, different backgrounds. So James is saying, hey, don't speak evil of one another. He was calling on God's people to be easy with their judgments of their brothers and sisters. Gossip and the assigning of evil motives are to be absent when it comes to the support Christians are to give one another. And I want to hone in on something just personal note, that evil motives. How often do we pull that one out of the hat? We say, oh, well, you know what, I know she's doing so-and-so, but you know what, I know why she's really doing it. Right? We ascribe that they're not doing it with pure motives. And that's wrong when we cast that judgment. That's what James is saying. That's not for us to decide. A Christian has done wrong if he or she slanders their brother or sister for the sake of personal gain. The brevity of life should teach us that we are not in a position to preside in judgment over the good faith choices that are made by our brothers and sisters in Christ. Essentially, in the end, one Christian's assessment of another ought to be based in their conscious efforts to obey the law and to obey God's will. Other matters That's really between themselves and God. That's not for us to make that determination. However, we do very often, right? So that was an issue that James wanted to bring up. Interesting thing is, this is the only place that I found that in the New Testament, God was called the lawgiver, where he says that in 4:12. God is a loving Father, but he is also an exacting judge. Okay? The tendency of modern Christians very often is to proclaim loudly those passages of God those passages that talk about love, kindness, compassion, and we kind of omit the statements that remind us that God does give us laws to live by, right? He judges his creation, against us, by laws and statutes that he gives. In other words, we got to take a balanced approach, and that's what James is saying here, is you got to live your life and do what you're going to do in the context that God is the lawgiver, and he expects certain things of us, and when we go making our own, trying to set our own trajectory and our own plan, so to speak, without considering his will, then we're doing wrong. He does judge us by the things that he set forth. And a lot of times, again, we got to have a balance. God the Father is loving, he is kind, he is compassionate, but on the other hand, what? He expects us to do what he needs us to do. Sometimes we don't always follow through with it. Questions, comments? Everybody's waking up. Brother Leon?
Point out that James isn't telling these people you can't have an opinion.
Right.
You can certainly have an opinion about what's going on. So you really can't avoid that. You try to live in a blindless fashion,
Sure.
that try to accept everything, and I guess maybe during the 70s, we had a period when people wanted to accept everything.
Kind of do what thou wilt.
It wasn't a good time for Christians at all. In the 70s in this country. And James isn't trying to say we can't live in an orderly fashion and have judgment on everything. He's simply saying that God is the final judge. And that he's the one that makes the determination. When you look to God, God, in fact, is the one that provides the wealth.
Sure.
He has everything, and he owns everything. And if he places a good portion in you, he looks at you, how you, as a steward,
What are you going to do with it?
resources. And he looks to see how you manage the good resources that he's placed in your care. So you best do good, and you best look at the guy to see how it is he wants you to manage those resources on that. Anyway, I don't want to.
No. And Brother Leon, as I read this, I pick up that also James is talking about maybe not so much righteous judgment, but like you said, opinion. I'm putting my opinion on what this sister's doing, what this brother's doing, and making that judgment based on that versus what's godly. And looking to God as he's ultimately got to deal with it, and not me. Absolutely.
The right is good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Brother Burner.
You made a comment and you were giving examples, but in that example, I guess I was thinking like, do I have a responsibility? The example that you gave, I believe you said something about you defame or you belittle a brother or
responsibility to right it if we can.
Okay, and would that fall into the category of judgment, or would that be something that we recognize that is improper for us as Christians?
Well, I think it falls in the line of that term, sort of righteous judgment. Okay, if I see a brother doing something that I can compare against God's standard, and I know that we shouldn't be doing that, I shouldn't hold back on letting him know. I don't think that's not my pace judging him. I'm maybe saying, hey brother, that's not right, but I'm using God's standard to let him know. And I think it's different than what James was driving at, was opinionated matters, where we're just, I don't like the color shoes you wear, it's my opinion. Versus using God's standard. Sir?
I think it's important to remember too, the backdrop of this letter. It's the issue of being different than the world standard. It starts in chapter 1 and how we view trials and difficulties and temptations and all that. It continues throughout the book. The world has a way they respond to things, but as Christians we respond different. And I think a lot of times, I think about agape love. I don't know where this originated or where I read it. I read somewhere where the agape love assumes the best. So it's evidence that it's true otherwise. But the world doesn't do that, right? The world assumes
Right.
it works.
Always.
And I wonder if there's an element of that in these verses that as Christians, we love each other the way we assume the best. Right? It's not always looking for judgment, it's looking to find fault. I
Right.
focus on that piece about that we're doing the doers law. We're going to be active, we're serving, and we're consumed with that. We've got a lot of time to work on those.
Everybody here, Lance? And I'm focusing on a piece of James here. We're probably looking at it like this, but Lance says, think about the entirety, totality of James's letter. And it is that, hey, don't be reactionary like the world. We got to be godly. We got to handle things differently than the world. So that is a good perspective. To drill down even in this one piece of scripture, that James is saying, don't be like the world. As a Christian, you got to have a little bit different standard. James really, in James 4:13-15, it says, come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such city, we'll spend a year there, we'll buy and sell, we'll make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. So James is saying that life is too brief to plan without God. In 4:13 here, he returned to the concerns that he had way back in chapter 2, verses 1-7. His readers were showing favoritism for wealthy people back in that earlier context. And we have a situation where, in the big picture, we had wealthy people who were oppressing the poor. But that wasn't their only offense. They were arrogant. We had wealthy merchants here acting as though what they accumulated and the wealth they had was all that mattered. James demanded that those who possess wealth reflect on the merited life. The reflection would lead to humility, and humility would lead to God. James essentially here and in chapter 5, he's essentially saying to these folks, come on guys, give this a little thought to what you do. Think about God. Merchants and landowners of the time belonged to a class that, quite frankly, a lot of them resisted the newness of Christianity. For James, the great sin of theirs was the arrogance and pride that they had. Because they accumulated this wealth and they had influence, they thought it was all about them. He indicted them on the case of luxurious living and injustice to the poor. And there's a few factors that kind of come into play here on James' message here. First off, there were great merchants all across the Mediterranean here that were doing business on a huge scale. So we had people that had a lot of power and a lot of influence. Secondly, in the Greco-Roman world, markets, they were sharply divided between rich and poor. And that's kind of one angle James is coming at. There was really no middle class like we have today in this country. You were either a poor person sloughing along through life, or you were pretty wealthy. There was really no middle ground. So that opened up a lot of opportunity for abuse and mistreatment. And we do know that a lot of the Jews that lived outside of Canaan were certainly merchants. We can see that in a couple of cases. Think about Lydia in the New Testament. She earned her living by being a merchant. When Paul came to Corinth, he teamed up with who? Aquila and Priscilla. He kind of shared in that trade with them, right? So what James is saying is the arrogance of these certain class of people was obvious. They thought little about God. They thought little about the inevitability of judgment. They thought very little about the brevity of life when they made plans. And for centuries, merchants in the Near East had a pretty tawdry reputation. Their values and ideals were often overshadowed by their leisure, trying to, their attempt to make money. Humility was far removed from the minds of these people. They followed prophets, and especially in the Jewish merchants, they really, quite frankly, despised the Christian people there. Because why? It threatened the balance of their power. It threatened the peace of their communities by them embracing the Messiahship of Christ and trying to live according to a different set of standards. So James's meaning here is pretty clear that life is short and it's uncertain. He says, like the splendor of the meadows, it shall vanish. Into the smoke they shall vanish away. So, what I'm saying here is we don't need to be morbid or preoccupied with death in order to recognize the brevity of life. It causes wise people to make plans contingent on the blessing of the Lord, or it should. So we should look at that and say, you know what, life is short. And it's not guaranteed. So I need to take God's will into account. Because all of us, think about it, we're just a wisp of smoke that it appears and it's gone. We're just, think about history being a big timeline. We're just a small plot on that timeline, right? So we certainly need to consider God and everything we do. James also talked about how life is it's too brief to be arrogant. All of us would do well to make plans on the will of God. In one of his parables, Jesus told about a rich man who made plans without God. And again, he heard God say that, you fool, this night your soul is going to be required. Again, we read about that in Luke 12. So a wise person knows, or should know, that we're a heartbeat away from death at all times. We're here because God allows us to be here. And that should leave no room for arrogance. Okay? Not only is it foolish to make plans as though life in this world is unending, I would go as far as to say, and I think this is what James is driving at, is he's offensive to God. You're basically saying, God, I know better than you, and I'm going to do what I do, and your will, well, we'll fit it in there something. When really it all starts and ends with God's will. And taking that approach that life is short and could end any time should motivate us to do the things we ought to do, to live for God, to live righteously. But we really get off course when we don't take that approach. And that's what James is trying to tell us here. To plan as though God doesn't exist is to boast in your own arrogance. That's what James is telling us. He said, all such boasting. He said this in chapter 4, verse 16. He said, all such boasting is evil. So the brevity of life leaves no room for an arrogant stance before God. So we can't really go through thinking we're that great and we're going to go on forever. The final verse in James 4 fits with difficulty into the warning for these merchants. Maybe what he intended to say is you know better, folks, than to disregard God. Maybe he's implying that these people, he is implying that they do well to recognize God and the way God works in their life and how he gives life on a daily basis. And then it'll end when God decides. What we see is throughout the Bible, godly people recognize that he gives life in breath. He gives life in heartbeats. He allows us to have the doing and the seeking of God's will should be for every person that's walking this earth. Let's look at 3 scriptures here. Somebody flip over with me Proverbs 27:1. Read that for me.
Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth.
Right. Don't boast about tomorrow. You know not what a day will bring forth. Ties right into what James is talking about. Let's flip over to Luke 22:42. I'm going to read that if you're there. Luke 22:42.
Father, you are willing to do this stuff for me, yet not my will, but yours be done.
Absolutely. Even Jesus called on whose will to be done? His Father. So should we not call on his will for everything in our life? Absolutely. Thirdly, let's look at Acts 21, verse 14.
It came to the chief priests and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great oath, and we will eat nothing until we do the law.
Okay, now,
41:14.
21:14.
So we would not be persuaded to seek saying, will the Lord be done?
There you go. Will the Lord be done? So we see this theme throughout the Bible that we need to consider God's will. And what is true for the readers of James' letter is true for all of us. The sin against God is committed not only by the things that we do, but by the things that we fail to do. Whatever else may be involved, when a person, for a person to know what God wants him or her to do and to fail to do it, or just to overtly just disregard, we're saying that it's what? It's sin. We're not taking God's will into account. Questions, comments?
So as trying to put it together, then to plan for tomorrow is not wrong.
No.
But to plan for tomorrow without recognizing your dependence on God.
Yes. Dave ties it together for you. Dave's absolutely right. What James is saying here, it's not wrong to plan. Planning is essential for life, right? Because we know in life to meet the goals and objectives, be it as an individual, be it as a church, just be it in general, we need to plan, right? We need to look for the future. We need to have goals, objectives, milestones to know where we're going. The difference here, as Dave says, that what kind of ties it together, is that we have to do that in the context of what does God want us to do? How am I living a godly life? If we're planning as a congregation, are we doing the things that are going to perpetuate God's message? That are going to grow the church? So yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference between just planning out of our own arrogance that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But we have to take into consideration what James is saying. We got to take into consideration that God is in charge, and He has a will for us, and He has things that He needs us to do along the way. We are dependent. That we don't do it without. We don't even get up this morning without Him. And that's really what James is driving at, Brother Leon.
Attacking the Pharisees' attitude. Jesus talking about the Pharisees indicated that, they're these people that wash outside the cup real clean and all this sort of thing.
And the inside filthy.
Filthy and whatnot. He said they love the praise of men. They do things to gain the praise of the people that are around them there. He said they want us to receive their reward when they got the praise of men. They're not going to be rewarded in the final end that, don't have that sort of attitude. Do things because they need to be done. And right to do it and whatnot. James over here in the last part of chapter 4 is considerably concerned about the fact that these people were accumulating wealth by cheating the poor. They were doing it by dishonest means. Dishonest accumulation of wealth and using it for the purposes that God gave it to you to start with and wanted you to have it and use it that way is not under attack in this chapter. But we're not do things so as to receive the praise of men, so we're trying to please God and do what God wants us to do and to do it with a spirit of humility. Humble yourself. Make that humble. That's, I don't know how it is with everybody, but for me it was very difficult to overcome what I call the pride of mind. I never did mind being praised by the people that I was around. I enjoy doing good things, but I enjoy hearing the praise of men also. Well, I think that I finally got over that. I pray God that I have. But I try not to have my primary purpose is to impress Gary, but to impress God.
That is something we can get hung up on is finding praise. I guess we're to do things that you should go about doing them even if nobody would ever know about it.
Exactly. Things people don't even know about, and never will know about.
God. So to kind of wrap this up, James indicted these wealthy merchants, and like Leon said, it's in the context of not the accumulation of wealth or having wealth. He was indicting them in the context of they're cheating people and abusing the poor for their own gain. And they certainly weren't living a life that was conducive to Christianity. And in fact, I guess you could dub this sort of a practical atheism, if you will. Because in practice, you're working counter to God. You're not taking His statutes to heart and living them out. They may profess that they believe in God, but their lives were no different than those who didn't claim to be Christians and those who were outside of the church. The world is not without folks that overtly resist God. There's lots of people that overtly say, you know what, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in any of that stuff. But there's also probably many, many, many times more people, millions of others, if you will, that muddle through life claiming that they believe in God, but acting just like these folks in James. Not living according to God's will, not taking Him into consideration, mistreating others. These folks, they make their plans for the future. They live day to day as if there is no God. James wanted his readers to know that it is not only foolish, but evil to push God out of our lives and not take Him into consideration when we're living life and making plans and just interacting with one another. 9:42. Got close. Any other questions or comments? Sure. Yeah, and that's why you see so many different, probably why you see so many different denominations and groups and splinter groups, and everybody's trying to do it their own way instead of the way God wants it done. Thank you. And thanks to you guys that added a lot to the conversation. Sometimes I get off on a tangent and I gotta have some help kind of pull it back together. But I appreciate your time. That's a wrap. We got a couple minutes worth of bill.